My name is Sean Little, and I am from Michigan. Yeah, so it's kind of different because where I'm at in my life now is that when I think about believing in God, it's like, do I think that God exists? And if you were to ask me that question, I would say for my entire life, I believe that God exists. But for me, there's a difference between that and following God. And so, while I might have said that there wasn't a God, when I would get angry, when I was younger and stuff like that, I'd be yelling at God. So apparently I did believe that he existed, but I wasn't always following God. And so there's a huge distinction in the two. But yeah, I've always believed that there was a God. So I grew up in a family that, we went to church. My dad, apparently, before my brother was born, who's a little bit older than me, my dad was saved. My mom grew up going to church. I was always going to, little, what do you call it? Bible school or whatnot, VBS, things like that. And so I grew up going to all those things. I went to a church, I was baptized, I think, when I was 5 years old, which, at this point in my life, I had no idea what I was doing. So to me, it didn't really signify anything. But there I was I can, eat the cracker with the grape juice now, kind of thing. But kind of in my life, there's a series of events that kind of transformed my relationship to faith. So we had that faith, but also we also lived in a secular world. So it's I went to public school, all these things. It wasn't, wasn't a big deal. But I had members of my family. It was my mom's sister and her family that were those Christians. So they were we don't celebrate Halloween. We are, super proper in our Christianity. It was almost like that judgmental Christianity, or that's how it felt to me. So you had two sides of the coin. And the other part was things that were happening in my life. And so, until I was 7, it was just oh, we go to church, this is what we do. And after about that time, I started moving in my life, to different places. And so my parents separated for a little bit. And so when we moved, we were still going to church. We were living with my grandma, and my grandma was super Jesus everything. That woman, when she passed away, she was praying to Jesus when that happened. So that was her life. And so I had that. And then I had, church after that. And then my dad finally came and lived with us. We had church again. Everything was great. And then things started to change. And so when I was 10, my dad passed away from pancreatic cancer. And I remember when that happened, it was this super, it was this really difficult moment, because I had believed in God. I was going to church, doing all these things. And I remember in that moment, the day that he died, being in this chapel of a hospice. And I remember, I don't know why I was so drawn there, but I was I'm going to go there by myself. And so I'm in there without my mom, without my aunt. And I'm just sobbing, thinking, why is this happening right now? It's hard to get into that mindset just because I was 10. But I remember afterwards, my aunt, the uber Christian aunt, and my mom came in, and I just kept crying. And they were praying and saying whatever they could, but I just couldn't stop crying. And I think in that moment, I started to think I had done something wrong, because obviously at age 10, this is not something that you're used to, and all of a sudden your favorite person in the entire world is just gone. And that kind of started this chain of events where life drastically changed. After that, my mom, single mom, we went to church kind of, but then didn't. And then things started to change even more. My mom got remarried, and the guy she remarried was not my dad. It was a terrible human. And, now I can look back and see he had a lot of baggage. But I remember we had such a dysfunctional family, but somehow my mom was well, we're going to start going to church again. And I'm why are we doing this? I'm standing next to the man that is in church, but I know that he yells at me. He's the one that says nothing good about me. And so I kept thinking, like, this is so fake. Like, Mom, why are we doing this? And the only reason I wanted to go to church was because I started playing guitar when I was like 14 or 15. And I remember going to this church and this guy had this like long blonde hair and he had this leather jacket on and was playing a Les Paul. And I was like, oh my gosh. And like, he started playing guitar solos and I was like, oh, you can do that in church? What? So I was like super excited. And so I was then going to this church super excited about it. And what was sad was then my mom, she got cancer. And then she passed away. And once again, I was in this situation where I was like, I must have done something wrong. Like, I remember the day that she passed away, I remember thinking like, at age 14, this is so weird, but the doctors, like my mom was on life support, and they asked my brother, who was 16 at the time, and me, who were 14, what to do with her. And I remember being like, why are you guys asking us? Like, I'm 14. But I remember clear as day. It was so weird because like everything was just a wreck. And I was like, I remember saying, she's suffering right now. Let her go home to Jesus. And I asked for a priest. So they went and found this priest in the hospital and I had him pray over her, and then they pulled the tube out, and then, you know, I watched her take her last breath and she was done. But after that moment, I think everything just kind of snowballed, and I got really bitter towards God. So I have all this happening, but then I started playing guitar and youth groups and all this stuff happening, and thinking like, man, if I just do right, like maybe God will be good with me. And I remember at this time too, I just always had this desire to want to help people. And when I was a senior, you know, I'm starting to be on fire for God. I think I'm getting it. You know, I'm looking at Christian schools to go to, like, oh, you know, like it was like, let's go. And I remember going on this trip with all of our entire senior class, and then like a couple of the senior pastors were there, and then some of the teachers were there. And I remember them being like, we were going to go do this service project, and the service project was that we were going to go talk to retired missionaries at this like retirement home. And I was like, I didn't know they had a retirement home for missionaries, but okay. And apparently that fell through. And so me and my friend were like, well, hey, like we know that there's homeless people, like why don't we go buy food and like give food out to the homeless? And it was super weird because like we said that and we didn't get a yes or a no, we got ignored. And I remember being like, what? And it was crazy because then the next day we went to downtown Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And as we're walking from this side street, there's this homeless man that's sitting right on the side of the street. Like obviously I saw him, so I know everyone saw him. And I watched all of my classmates walk past this man, but then all of the administrators and principals and teachers walk past this man. I remember looking at my one friend and going, if that's what it means to serve Jesus, if that's what it means to be a Christian, to walk past those people and not even acknowledge their presence. And I know that each of you has money in your pocket, that you're gonna go buy something for yourself, and I want nothing a part of this. So we went and bought this man food. I remember even the people at the restaurant, they're like, he's a really good man, like thank you for helping him. And my faith just, it was done after that, you know? And by that time it was like, dude, I was ready to go do whatever I wanted to. I was gonna find some other freedom that didn't have anything to do with God, because I was like, dude, you guys are a bunch of, you're posers. You say that you're one thing, but you're not doing the thing that you say that you're gonna do. It's hypocritical, and I wanted no part of it. Consequently, at that time too, I then started, you know, running into drugs and alcohol and all this stuff, and like, man, that life was really appealing for a time. So, yeah, I remember that being like that pinnacle point where I was like, dude, I'm done with this. You know, I think for me, you know, after this point, you know, people always said like, oh, you need God, like you can't do anything separate from God. And I remember my family also saying that, you know, like I was kicked out of my house when I, you know, went off to, you know, right before college because they didn't approve of the life that I was doing. And I went to college, and it was crazy because I did really well in school. In fact, my uncle once told me, he's like, dude, you're like almost too smart for your own good. Because I did really well in college, and so I figured out for myself, I didn't need anybody. I remember the summer before college, I'm sleeping out of my car, I'm, making whatever me, like I felt like this survivor, but I was always holding on, but I always like had people helping me. But then I go to college and I'm like, okay, boom, like I'm gonna find this whole other world. And I found this identity. It was in being that guy that, like we went to the parties and like, oh man, we're about to have a good time. Like, oh yeah, like let's turn up. But that lasted for a season. And so what always happened, and what seemed to happen for 10 years almost, is life would be good and then boom, something would happen and I felt like my world got squeezed. Like it was super uncomfortable. And it was so interesting because the thing that I would go to is like, I need God. But then right when everything was fine again, it's like, oh, I'm off doing like the next thing, And so my finding my faith journey was really this struggle of needing help, but also being too prideful to like get over myself, Like the worst thing that could have happened to me did happen to me, and that was for me to be successful and do whatever I wanted to do. Because like for me, I was like, see, I can do this, but I can also do this. Like, the moment I walked across that stage for my first degree, I remember being like, oh, you guys didn't know what I was doing. Like I just like did everything I wanted to, and I got a 3.5, and I graduated, and I had already have a job set up for me to like go to after school. And so like for anybody that ever doubted me, it's like, dude, I got this. But I was 22, and how I was living my life wasn't sustainable. And so I had 10 years of just this moving forward, and then boom, something would happen and my world would shrink, or I felt like something was caving in, And so me finding my faith was a series of falls, getting up, but never willing to submit to a truth that I think that I knew, but I definitely spent a lot of time playing the fool, being like, I can't do that just yet. At that point, I felt like, if I was ever gonna find my faith, like someone was gonna have to wrestle me to the ground and show me that, miracles do in fact happen, because I don't know how much I believed in them at that point. Rock bottom. It's an interesting thing. I remember one time being in an AA circle, and I remember looking at this guy, and I was fresh off of a relapse. It was New Year's Day 2019. I remember just being like, blah, blah. I remember looking at this guy and I said, man, when does this stop? Like I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I asked him, when does this stop? And he said to me, when you stop digging. But it was tough, because if you were to ask me about rock bottoms, I could look at my life and be like, dude, when I was 23, I remember this one time that it was the first time that I think I had alcohol poisoning, and like all of the things that happened to me afterwards, I was like, okay, now I hit my rock bottom. Or when I was like, I had no money, and I was like freaking out and ended up in a hospital and like all this stuff when I was like 20, I was like, maybe that was a rock bottom. Or when I was 25 and just literally like I hurt so bad, and so I just kept drinking and drinking and drinking, like maybe that was my rock bottom. Or when I was 26, when I got my first and only DUI, but like I was like, now I totally messed up. I thought that was rock bottom. But then even before I got sentenced, for this DUI for 3 months straight, I literally drank every single day, and I was like, maybe that's my rock bottom. I thought I was gonna lose a job, maybe that's your rock bottom. Like all these like little pieces. And then I remember when I was 28 years old, almost 28 years old, I was going through a really hard time, and I went to Europe. Like I always kind of seem to forget that I went to Europe, because I don't really remember going to Europe, and that's kind of a sad truth. And I remember doing some things. I went to Scotland, and I remember doing some things that I was like, I mean, at this point, it's just like, you know, this weird life that I like almost don't remember. But I remember coming back and just being so ashamed of just the life that I had been living, that I was like, maybe this is your rock bottom. I remember it was a summer's day, and I was in my house, and I couldn't go to work for like a week. I was off on some mental health leave. I was, you know, I had anxiety, I had depression. Like I was just, I mean, dude, I was done for. And it was like 2 p.m. I remember just being just totally obliterated. And I remember looking, and I had a few tattoos at the time, and one of them was, I had gotten this right before I went to Scotland because I had started going back to church. So I look at one arm and I have a big cross on my arm, and then I like roll over kind of, and this is one of those times when I went back to God when I was 25, and I had Yahweh in Hebrew on my other arm. And I remember seeing that, and I was like, you said you wanted to start going to church, you said you were going to turn your life around, and this is what you're doing right now. Like, this is what you've become. And that was the first time that I ever said I needed help, and that I knew that I was an alcoholic. I'd never said that. And I remember being like, oh wow. But even that wasn't a rock bottom. I then started going to AA and trying to go to recovery and like all these things. And so for like literally this really long time, I was like in and out, just trying to figure out what to do. And I remember when I was 29, like finally like getting my life together, like, oh boom, like, you know, I had like this dream job. I'm making the most money that I ever made. Like I'm 3 months sober, you know, like I'm doing all this cool stuff. Like I'm making a name for myself. You know, it's like, oh, Sean, that sober guy, blah, blah, blah. Like one thing happened in my life, and I started drinking, and it just like got uncontrollable. And I started showing up to work drunk. And I got fired from a job for drinking. That's humiliating. And I had to postpone my master's degree because of that. I had to postpone some other stuff in my life because of that. But even that wasn't my rock bottom, because I kept digging. My rock bottom was September 17 of 2019. I was in my last semester of grad school after having messed it up that spring. I had started another job, was doing an internship. Didn't matter what I was doing. I couldn't stop drinking. I had started and I couldn't stop. And I remember even every day I'd be like, dude, you've stopped before, but you've stopped before. And I couldn't do it. And then I'd pray to God, and I'd be like, God, like I've been going to church faithfully. I've been talking to you. Like just help me to stop, man. Like, can you just make me stop? Like, I don't know what you need to do. And so I'm like talking to people about like, maybe I need to go do this, or I need to go to recovery. Who knows what I need to do? But I remember just shutting down. And it was September 17, 2019. I remember being in my room. No one was home. I was living with my brother and his 2 kids at the time. And it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And I was just I drank so much, and I'd worked that day. I was drinking at work, and I was supposed to go to class that day, but I remember being like, dude, you are a hazard right now. You can't even drive your car. So I went home and I kept drinking. And I remember at that point, the thoughts of wanting to end my life were just, I mean, they were screaming at me like, dude, you're done. And so I'm in my room holding an iPad and my cell phone, and one of them is searching recovery centers, and the other one is the most effective and non-painful way to kill yourself. And I remember calling this treatment center, and so I don't have health insurance, I don't have anything. And I remember calling this treatment center, and I was like, hey, like, you know, here's my situation, can I come in? Like, I need your help or whatnot. And they're like, well, do you have insurance? And I was like, no, but like, you guys are a nonprofit, so I know that, like, don't you guys have like a reserve? They're like, well, yeah, but you have to apply for that. And I was like, so then what's it gonna cost for me to come there? And they were like, well, for a 5-day stay, it's gonna be like $4,000. And I was like, so my life is depending on money that I don't have right now. And I was like, dude, you guys are the worst. Like, I'm done with you. Like, you guys shouldn't be in business, but like, whatever. And I remember just like sobbing. I was done for. And I had these like pills or something that were downstairs. I don't know what they were for, but I was like, well, maybe if I just take a bunch of those, I can end my life. And I couldn't stop crying. It was like 5 o'clock, and I have no idea what it was, but I remember feeling this like inner voice, like from God, just calling, being like, are you done? I can't do this anymore. And it was like God being like, will you just trust me? Will you just trust me? I don't want to hurt you. I want what's best for you. And at that point, I was like, dude, I got nothing left. I got nothing left. I'm done fighting. And I'm either going to end my life or I'm going to do something else. And it was the last time I ever drank. It was the last time I remember wanting to end my life. And that is the date I will forever remember as my little birthday celebration of this new life that God has blessed me with for almost 2 years now. And yeah, that was my rock bottom, but that was also potentially one of the best days of my life. I remember after that day in September, I remember in my head, I was like, nothing's gonna stand in my way. Like if I have God and God's with me, then I'm gonna do whatever I need to do because it is a two-way relationship. So like God's gonna save you, but like you gotta do something. So I was like, I'll do whatever I got to. So I started hitting AA meetings all the time and I was like, nothing was gonna stand in my way. But I remember being like, I need to focus on this and God will work through this and then I will slowly add things back into my life. And so I didn't go to church for like 3 months. And I remember even I was dating somebody at the time and I remember God whispering, but being like, you need to get out of this. And I was like, okay. And so I didn't listen to him right away, but so I had some months of recovery and then all of a sudden I remember like that voice getting louder and I was like, remember that one time that you didn't listen, Sean, and how that turned out for you? You gotta listen. And I ended that relationship and I remember God being like, okay, he's ready to listen. Like we're ready to go, man. Like that's all I needed. And so, I started working these steps, these recovery programs. And one of the things that you end up doing is like looking at all of these lies or these resentments and things that you had in your life and then acknowledging them, looking at your part in them, owning your crap, and then on the other end, learning to forgive people. And where you need to, going back and telling people you're sorry for the things that you did when you were hurting. It's almost like that those pieces of shedding those layers of skin, like I said, and I'll tell people now, I'll tell I've talked to my brother, my sister, my fiance, like all of these things being like, I almost don't remember this life that I once lived. Like I'll get these memories and I'm like, that was me. It's crazy. But one of those people was my sister. I remember in March of 2020, like COVID had just started like going rampant, like everything shutting down. And at that point, like my recovery actually started taking off. It was crazy because like people are like freaking out. They're like, wait, we can't be around other people. And like right then and there, like I ended up started working with like one other person and it was like, dude, we're just gonna keep going. And I remember getting a hold of my sister who has been a missionary in Mexico for 5 years. And she I messaged her and I was like, hey, I need to talk to you. Let's find a time. And her and I, for 12 years, accumulation, spent maybe a week of time together. Not even. Like, we just, we went our separate ways, and I had my life and she had hers, and she was like the saintly one, like the one that went to Christian college and then, went to be a missionary in Mexico. And it's crazy because at that time too, she was like, but I need to talk to you. And I was like, oh, okay. And when we talked, I just wanted to apologize and just tell her, like, I know that I hurt you, but I need you to know that in those moments, it wasn't you. It had everything to do with me and where I was at, but I'm just sorry. I'm sorry that I wasn't the brother that you needed. I'm sorry that I was selfish. I'm sorry that I just felt this deep feeling like I had missed a decade of your life, and we went through the same thing. We both lost parents, we had similar things that happened. And she at that time had also been working with somebody else, and God had kind of told her, like, you need to forgive Sean. And so we came together and we're trying to have the same conversation with each other. And I was like, dude, that's just God working, And so then I was like, well, why don't we start talking? I'd like to get to know you. And so we started talking a little bit. And I remember her asking me, I was talking, I didn't have a job at this point, stuff shut down. I'd been working 2 jobs and doing some other stuff, and now you're on unemployment. And I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna focus on recovery and start dreaming for the future. And it was crazy because I started talking to my sister, and I remember telling her what I wanted to do with my life. And my dream was that I wanted to be working with kids again. I had done that in my 20s, and I just wanted to bring hope to kids in situations, and young adults, even people in college, to look at them and say, whatever you have going on in your life, I'm not you, but I've been to a lot of those places. I've been in some of the darkest places I can possibly think of. The feelings of disgust with myself, unlove, undeserving of so many things, addiction, drugs, alcohol, all of those things. But I just wanted to help rewrite that narrative and be like, dude, you have a Father in heaven who loves you. And to be honest, I spent 10 years coming to the same conclusion that I had before, was that none of that was going to save me. And so, we had this talk, and a week later, my sister, remember, we have no relationship with each other, and all of a sudden I get this text from her, and she's like, hey, I think you should come serve in Mexico. Pray about it, but be prepared to come to Mexico. And I got this message, and I'm like, wait, what just happened? And so I remember then talking to my brother who I'm living with, and I was like, dude, Rachel sent me this text, and I read it to him, and he was like, wait, Rachel Little said that? Our sister? And I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, wow. I was like, yeah. And so I was like, well, Rachel, did God tell you this? And she's like, well, we need to talk. But it was so crazy because it was in that moment, I was like, why not? And the more I talked about it, I had to fill out an application, do some interviews and stuff like that. I remember thinking, I will always regret it if I don't go. And I was like, Sean, God has led you to where you're at right now. And if this is where he's calling you, just step into it. So that was how I ended up in Mexico, a year ago. I remember last year, I had celebrated 1 year just addiction-free. And I was at this men's recovery center here in Mexico, part of the ministry that I work for. And I'm visiting these men, and the guy that runs it, has his own story. But I showed up there, and he's like, well, we're gonna have him speak to the men. And I'm like, wait, what are we doing? So I'm having somebody translate for me, because at this point I didn't know any Spanish. And I start talking to them and kind of sharing with them my story. And he then looked at me and was like, well, why are you here? And I was like, well, because God called me here. This is where he brought me. And so I said I'd follow. And he looked at me and he goes, no, son, why are you here? And I remember looking at the men's faces around that table. And for some reason, my eyes started welling up with tears. And I was just like, it was almost as if I was a conduit of some message that I needed to hear from me, but I didn't know what I was saying almost at the time. It was such a weird experience. But I remember saying, God gave me back my life, and so I gave him mine. And so I firmly believe that wherever I'm called to, the things that happen in my life, I don't believe in coincidences. It's God. God is so good. My life is a living example of what God can and will do with a life if you let him. And so where I am, here I am now. I came down to Mexico for 6 months, and it's been a year. I came down to just help out, do some maintenance, and hang out with some kids, and now I'm working with our organization doing, some high-level stuff that I used to do in my past for but it's not a matter about what I'm doing. It's a matter of God being like, well, but you have this, but you have this, but you have this. And some of the crazy things, even in my personal life, I have a relationship with my sister now. Somebody who we never spoke on the phone, and it's been a year. Literally, I've been here for a year, and now she'll message me. She comes to me to be consoled. We hug each other, and it's not this, oh, hi, it's my brother. It's no, I love you. That. I met the woman of my dreams here. I'm absolutely amazed with what's happened in my life, and I'm just a relationship with my sister. I'm serving in Mexico. I don't know when I'll ever go back to the States. Getting married in 3 months. What? Just you sit there and you're I always feel really weird, because I don't want to just portray this thing where it's oh, follow God and everything's gonna be super easy for you, because I'm gonna tell you there are so many days where I'm dude, I'm gonna give up. I can't do this anymore. I'm freaking out right now. And I still have those days. Life didn't just become easy when I started following God, but I will tell you that, as it says in the Bible, my yoke is light and my burdens are few. And I will tell you, as sure as day, that following God, you don't know how different it's going to be, how hard it might be, but how much better it's going to be. Yeah, man. I've said before, I wish I had a me when I was younger. But I also know me, and I remember thinking, yeah, that could have been true. I wanted someone to identify with, but also did I really want to listen to anybody? And that's a tough one, because sometimes people are oh yeah, I'll listen, oh, I'll do this, and it's you don't want to listen, it's fine. But if I could focus on one thing, it is focusing on how do you see yourself? And more importantly then, after you find that out, it's how do you see yourself in the eyes of our Father in heaven. And here's what I mean by that. I had believed that God hated me. So then obviously in my head, I did something wrong. I did something wrong, so then my parents passed away. I did something wrong, so now I'm an addict. I did something wrong, I did something wrong, I did something wrong, or I wasn't good enough. God's not sitting up there, if you ever seen that movie Bruce Almighty, it's not like God's up there with his little, magnifying glass burning ants. Like, that's not how that works. And if you read the Bible long enough, and if you read it well enough, you're gonna find out time and time and time again that it's one of those things where it's like, dude, God just loves you. And I know that that's like difficult for people to try and understand, but it's like, that's just the truth of the matter. And so you have, God who's always there, always loving you. And so, I think about those moments, and I think about one of these songs that I remember hearing. It was a Christian hip hop artist, Lecrae, and he was like, if you ever think that you're going to be ready, or you're going to be good enough or something like that, like to come to God, like just stop, like just go, and find out and realize that, like, think about like love. It's like this thing that we talk about. It's in pop culture. It's all of that. But like, you have this God who is in heaven, but who's also like right here and in you and in me. That's like, dude, I just love you. I just love you. There's nothing that you could do to separate me from that love. And so God's not up in heaven being like, well, let's see how you did today. You did that well, but you know what? Right here, you messed up there, so like, you get a B+ for today. Like, we don't serve a God that does that. That's just ridiculous to think of, but that's what I thought. And so if you're one of those people that thinks that like you're undeserving of love, or you think that you're somebody that like God's putting you on a grading scale, like, it's just wrong. It's not right. You're deserving of love. And like, if you think that there's ever even a question in your mind, like, oh, well, I'm gonna go do this thing, like, ask yourself why. Because like, those things can cut you. Like, I was like, well, Sean, why are you drinking? I'm like, well, because I got nothing else. I was like, that's what I spent my day thinking, that like another drink or another puff of something was gonna save me. And guess what? Like, it won't. Like, it just, the fact of the matter is, it won't. And you can go down that road and you're probably gonna be young, dumb, and stupid. And like, I get that, but I'm telling you right now, it won't do it. You might make it till you're 30, you might make it till you're 40, God knows you might make it till you're 50, but I will tell you, look up a picture of people doing long-term drinking or long-term smoking or whatnot, and if you like how your face looks right now, stop it. Don't do anything stupid, because you will look really ugly. Not even gonna lie here. But it's not even about that, it's that you're gonna feel ugly in here. And like, why cause yourself the pain? You have a God that loves you. Learn to accept love. Learn to love yourself. And if anything, I remember somebody telling me, I wish you could see yourself the way that we see you. I wish you could see yourself the way that God sees you. And the moment you start to do that, everything will change.